Welcome to Conversations from Stritch. Today is Thursday, November 7th. I'm Dr. David Livingston, president of Lewis University, and I'm joined by Dr. Christopher Sant, our provost. It is great to be here. We have a really interesting show today. I do want to mention and just remind everybody on campus, yesterday we had the visitation and mass for the Christian burial for Brother Raymond McManaman. Brother Ray passed away on October 30th. He was one of 7 original brothers that arrived to Lewis in 1960. And he retired as a professor in the theology department after 51 years of service to Lewis just a couple years ago. He really personified the mission of the brothers. Through his warmth, his care for students, his humor, he really was one of those icons. I was saying to Brother James yesterday at the visitation, he was just kind of a giant on campus. And being that giant, he has been presented with multiple awards over the year. He was this distinguished LaSallian educator in the spring of 2016 for that year, for his not only the excellence of his teaching, but also the length of service of his teaching. Brother Ray was a native of Waukegan, Illinois. He obtained his Bachelor's of Arts degree and Master's of Arts from St. Mary's University in Winona, Minnesota. And just for people, not everybody knows that St. Mary's in Winona is one of our sister schools, so it's a Christian Brothers school. A Master's of Arts from Seattle University and a Doctor of Ministry from the Aquinas Institute of Theology. And a Doctorate of Sacred Theology from San Francisco Theological Seminary. Brother Ray enjoyed reading. He followed Notre Dame football. He was a huge White Sox fan, and he loved going to Lewis University athletics, but especially Lewis University baseball. The most recent honor that he received in recognition of the enormous contributions to Lewis University was naming one of our new street names for him. It runs across the front of campus from North Hall across to the front of the LRC. So that will be called Brother Raymond Drive. I do want to also point out that this week's community hour featured the JLPSS Career Day, psychology graduate career session. Also involved a Gaza documentary screening and a session on thriving as first-generation flyers. I just want to point out one other thing, I guess maybe one or two other things that happened this week. Last night I was at the Rainbow Council honoring of their Distinguished Citizen of the Year, and Mr. Bob Filato is an alum of Lewis University, and he received that award. He's a local businessman, really involved in the community, and for me represents what Lewis alumni do for their community after they graduate. We always talk about, we graduate people that are going to go out and make a difference in the world, make the world a better place. We want people to do that, and I think Bob has really taken that up. He is really working hard on the cultural side of that for the area because he is the chair of the board of the Rialto Theater in downtown Joliet. They have really tried hard to kind of restabilize, because there were some challenges financially, and now to really build on what is a beautiful, beautiful building. And Bob has been the lead person in that charge. And I think, for us as a university to have an alum like that who then takes up this cultural icon in the community makes a big difference. So, just lots of things going on and people to be recognized like Brother Ray, but also Bob. So anyway, and I know we have lots of other things going on campus and many other accolades to give out for people's accomplishments.
Yeah, and I just want to say that was a incredible, really, really beautiful service yesterday with, some really great testimonials as well as really, really beautiful music, and I really was moved by the whole process, especially being reminded or being able to sit with Brother Ray's accomplishments during that whole time. So turning to some News in the community, congratulations to Dr. Amanda Harsey, who published an article called Computational Complexity and Pragmatic Solutions for Flexible Tile-Based DNA Self-Assembly in the Journal of Natural Computing. This research was done in collaboration with professors from the US and Europe and was supported by the Collaborate at ICERM and the ROOF programs of the American Institute of Mathematics and Institute of Computational and Experimental Research in Mathematics. Professors and students from Lewis attended the 2024 Midwest Annual Robert Noyce Teacher Scholarship Program Conference held October 18th and 20th in St. Louis. The Robert Noyce Teacher Scholarship is a program that helps prepare future high school STEM teachers through exclusive opportunities. Scholars can attend workshops, to participate in summer research programs, present at conferences, and receive post-licensure support for their first 2 years of teaching. This year's conference had the theme Fostering STEM Futures, Resiliency and Assessment Practices, and Lewis attendees included Professors Teresa Bixby, Sarah Brown, Doreen Huer, and Marie Meyer, as well as students Amelia Bresnahan, Danny Danhausen, and Diana Sanchez. It's our honor to host award-winning historian Nikki Brown on November 12th. Dr. Brown will be speaking next Tuesday on the lecture is called Afro-Turks and Black Consciousness in the Middle East. That's at 2 p.m. in AS 158A with a reception to follow. Excited about a new art exhibit is now open in the Wadsworth Gallery, located in the Aramis Fine Arts Building. Jesse Howard, The Emerging of a Black Diaspora, is on view through November 22nd. Mr. Howard's work reflects his own experience and living and being raised in Chicago's inner city. Reception and gallery talk is on November 14th at 7 p.m. And as we talked about last week, the Philip Lynch Theater presents the fall musical Puffs, written by Matt Cox. Puffs will have performances November 15th through 17th and November 21st through 24th. Puffs is a parody of the Harry Potter book series by J.K. Rowling from the perspective of the Puffs, that is, the members of the Hogwarts House Hufflepuff. So looking forward to seeing that when it opens. I guess that's next week or a week and a half.
Yeah, I think next week. And we would have an opportunity, some of us who are on faculty and staff, to attend the kind of dress rehearsal on next Thursday night.
And I think that would be the 14th, right?
Yeah, next Thursday night.
The night before it opens.
Yeah.
All right, so we have some...
we do have some things that we just want to announce in terms of things that are going on campus. So tonight, this afternoon, the Wiesenthal Colloquium is happening. Robert Plunkett is speaking there. We also have the Creative Writing Series, Jeremy Wilson. That's at 4. And then tonight at the Student Center is Henna Night. So I'm always reminded, I think, Chris, you and I have talked about this. I'm not sure everybody knows this. So my daughter-in-law is, her family is originally from India. So just a little story about henna. So we had a 5-day wedding when my son got married, and she's a huge Eagles fan, and my son is a huge Packers fan. And so women who get married, the tradition is they have it takes 5 or 6 hours to do their henna. It runs all the way from their fingertips all the way up their arm, almost to their shoulder. And so this is a long process of sitting there. And she had the Eagles, logo and the eagle up her arm on her right side, and the Packers, which was a big sacrifice for her because she doesn't like the Packers at all. But we're a big Packers family, up her left arm. And so her whole henna for her wedding were Packers and Eagles. So if you like, henna is it's a traditional Indian way of kind of celebrating, like people would wear earrings or any number of things. Henna is a way of decorating ourselves and being able to show what we care about. So they'll do henna tonight. Tomorrow, we have multiple things happening in the afternoon as well as in the evening. So tomorrow afternoon, debating the Second Amendment. First Gen faculty panel is tomorrow afternoon at 2. And then, as you see on here, men's basketball get their season off with the GLVC GMAC Challenge, where Lewis will be hosting Malone tomorrow night. In addition to those events, this weekend we will be hosting the men's and women's cross country NCAA regional championships. I am quite confident that we will send runners to the national championships, because we usually do every year, but this is the regional meet, and we will be hosting that on Saturday at 10 o'clock. Also on Saturday, the Vietnam Veterans Pinning Ceremony will be occurring. And then Saturday afternoon, men's basketball hosts Tiffin. Sunday, big event, men's soccer hosts Rockhurst in the first round of the GLVC tournament. Long way to go, but I really believe that the men's soccer team is really, they've kind of been building. And so we hope that, wish them all the success in the world as the tournament begins. Sunday evening, we have Mass again, and then Veterans Day ceremony on Monday in the Aviation Building at 11. We have a lot of Veterans Day celebrations going on around different parts of campus. Also on Monday, Lucky Bamboo Night at the Student Center at 6. Pride and Pronoun Pin Making, also in De La Salle 251 on Monday. And then Tuesday, we have a event over that the BSU is hosting, Brushstrokes and Vibes. And then also in the Student Center, it ends with us exploring domestic violence, as you see on there. The other thing that I want to point out is that next Wednesday, and this will be kind of the festival celebrating different cultures and faith traditions will be happening during Community Hour next week. So if you're interested, if you want to either celebrate your own faith tradition or you want to be involved in learning a little bit about Hinduism or Islam or Christianity, we have other faith traditions, but those three, we have significant populations on our campus that will be celebrating those. The other thing that's coming up next week is travel. So we talked about a little bit about the hosting for athletics, but this weekend, women's bowling will be traveling to the Lady Jacket Classic in Kenosha, Wisconsin. We also have women's volleyball traveling to Truman State and Upper Iowa. And then we also have women's basketball who will be going up to the Wisconsin Dells to face Michigan Tech and Northern Michigan. So big events this weekend, the really starting of what I would call the winter sports. We see the kind of ending with the cross-country regional championships and the start of the GLVC tournament for men's soccer, and then the beginnings of basketball and other winter sports that will begin to play out. So Chris, I know you're going to be introducing our guest, but the other big thing that happened this week, and this is where our guest is connected, we all are aware that we had a presidential election that only happens every 4 years. So there was a lot of news coverage and media, and we're excited to be able to talk about the results of the election with somebody who really knows this area well.
Yeah, we are really excited about that conversation. I'd love to just tick off a couple things off my list before I introduce our guest. That community hour next week is that All Fest that you mentioned. Just to remind people that it's the extended community hour next week. It's one of the 4 events of the year that has that extension. And I've not heard a lot about the planning, but last year it had some incredible food, and I think that tradition is going to continue next week. And also just a thank you to it's common or somewhat common, because our athletics department is so successful to host NCAA events, often in the Neil Carey sports and basketball and volleyball and so on. But it's really special to host a cross-country event. There are very few cross-country tracks across the area, and it is a big deal to be a host for such a big regional NCAA event where all teams from all over the Midwest are going to be here competing. So just a big thank you to the facilities and grounds people who've prepared the track, to everyone who's working on Saturday morning to make it an incredible event with thousands of people here hosting that really important event. And you seem not like very not superstitious person predicting that we are going to have great success through the weekend, but I agree, we have great teams, and it'll be wonderful to watch Lewis compete in those environments. One last reminder is that we have an email, askus@lewisu.edu, if you would like to ask a question, to get into our conversation. Thank you. We've already received a couple of questions through the email that came in before we started. We're really appreciative of those, and we'll get them into the conversation. And if you're watching this on YouTube, again, please feel free to send an email to that address. And even if the show is not, if you're not watching it live, we can still get the question to our guest or whomever might be the best person to answer the question. So I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Stephen Nawara, who is an associate professor and chair of the Department of Political Science at Lewis. His teaching and research focus is on American politics with a specialization in elections, public opinion, media, and political parties. His research has been published in journals such as Political Behavior, Presidential Studies Quarterly, Social Science Journal, and the National Political Science Review. So Steve, so great for you to be with us. I know that we've been really busy for maybe 3 weeks or so, lending your expertise about elections to many different audiences, including our local news agents in Chicago, which we're very grateful for you, and I've learned a lot from you watching you on those shows. So I guess we just want to begin with your sort of, I know the election is just a couple days old and there'll be lots of more information coming out in detail, but what kind of conclusions have you seen so far about just all of the different statistical dimensions of the election?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk. Most people probably know Donald Trump became the next president of the United States. In terms of what the overall result is, it was basically, if you took what happened in 2020 and just shifted everything 3 or 4 points towards the Republicans. It was a fairly uniform shift. I don't know if you've seen the graphs where they show the little arrows on each county showing how much the county vote totals move one way or the other. It's not unusual to see a general trend one direction or another in those kind of maps. But what was unusual this time is that it was pretty consistent. Just about every county moves in kind of the same amount of way towards the Republicans. Of course, there's exceptions. There's thousands of counties. But from that, it's what we can take from it is that it wasn't one region of the country. It probably wasn't one demographic group that swung wildly. I'm sure there will be ways of teasing out how demographics voted as things get finalized. But it was a general shift rightward.
So I just 2 things that I'd love to have you talk through that a little bit. I guess maybe let's talk about that shift, but then I want to also emphasize that for me personally, it was the last 6 months, and I was literally just in Pennsylvania last weekend, so I was in the heart of this very polarized country. And when I guess I'd love you to, that word is bandied around a lot, so maybe you could talk about it from a political science point of view, what polarization means. But I think the other thing that I guess I'd want to emphasize is that from a popular vote point of view, that kind of 3% shift seems that it went from let's say a 48-51 to a 51-49 or 50-50 vote.
Hard to tell because we're still waiting.
Yeah, we're still waiting for all the results,
but
I guess it feels important to me to emphasize that the country had a polarized election, and that the consequences or the vote totals, and I know they're not all in, are going to turn out to be almost a 50-50 split in terms of the total electorate, in terms of being Democrat, Republican, or at least voting for, and I know we'll talk about split ticket voting maybe a little bit later, but could you just talk about how politicians think about polarization, and then also how politicians think about a country that is actually in their voting behavior split down the middle? Because I think some people are coming away from this thinking, well, it's such a major win for Donald Trump and the Republicans. That is true in terms of power, but the vote totals are really split. The other thing I'd love you to talk about is that a 3% shift is different in a, let's say there was a Republican county that voted 75-25 in the last election. I just want to emphasize that what you're saying is it's now voting 78-22.
Yep.
And that a county that voted 75-25 for the Democrats last time now voted 72-28.
Yeah, roughly.
Right? So it's those counties that were highly Democratic are still highly Democratic, but they shifted a little bit more. More people voted for Republicans, and those that were highly Republican became even more Republican. So could you, I don't know, that's a lot of questions. Those were three main questions, but I guess I'm interested in polarization, that the country's still split, and that these moves actually shifted people, more to the right, but that may have made them even more Republican and some a little less Democratic.
So, just to kind of explain polarization first, what's meant by that. We tend to think of polarization as a greater consistency within the political parties' ideologies. Okay. So if you go back several decades, or even just a couple decades, it was not uncommon at all to see a lot of conservative Democrats in Congress or liberal Republicans in Congress, and certainly a lot of moderates in both parties. But in the past 20 years, 30 years, increasingly so, there's been a greater overlap. Now, in Congress, pretty much every Republican would call themselves a conservative. And pretty much every Democrat would be classified as a liberal.
Interesting.
And so what ends up happening is that is also taking place in the American public as well. Okay. And a lot of people are in the middle. Not necessarily strongly Democrat, not necessarily strongly Republican, and the moderate middle still is the vast majority of the votes that are out there. So what has happened in now several successive elections, we have had elections where the choices that we are given are between ideological candidates, people who would be considered conservative or liberal. So even though the actual American public is pretty moderate, when you look at the median voter, you end up with large swings based on who wins.
So can I want to follow up on this, because this is, I think, really important for our audience to hear. What I think you're saying is that in some ways, the politicians who are elected do not reflect the values of the voters because their choices are between two people on maybe more on the edges. They're more I get to choose between a conservative Republican and a liberal Democrat, and I'm a moderate in the middle. And so I have to make that choice, but the person who ends up in office doesn't necessarily reflect my values.
Yeah, I think that's true. I don't want to dismiss the fact that there are conservative Republicans and liberal Democrats. There are millions and millions and millions of those as well. But just the median voter, if you lined everybody up on a continuum, the average person's going to be in the middle. That for the vast majority. How would
you divide up the electorate? And I know I'm not saying about what just happened, because I know we don't have that data yet, and I think it would be good for you to talk about that. But is it kind of a third, a third, a third? Would you say a third of the electorate is kind of moderate, a third is actually quite conservative, and a third is quite liberal? Or is it not quite that? Is it more 40, 20, 20, or I don't know?
This might be more in the weeds than you're hoping for.
Yeah.
But it depends on how you ask the question.
Okay.
That if you just ask people, are you liberal or conservative or moderate? Most people will answer moderate. More people will say conservative than liberal. Just because the term liberal has kind of been demonized in a lot of conservative media. But when you start asking people about specific policies, then you get a lot more of an equal
And do you,
balance.
as political scientists, do you line up those value-based kind of positions and then put them into a more quote-unquote liberal even if they don't say, I'm a liberal,
exactly. Yeah.
you will
might
take
not,
this
You might not
thing,
identify as a liberal, but if you want to
your
increase
policies,
the social safety net, if you want to increase taxes on wealthier people and lower taxes on lower income earners, and have greater intervention of regulation in the economy, those are all liberal positions, whether you identify.
Right, so you as a political scientist will put them there to try to understand the electorate.
And good research is going to do both to make sure that your subjective decisions aren't going to cause bias, but at a certain point you have to make a decision. In terms of the actual results themselves, I don't want to minimize that a 3 to 4 point shift towards the Republicans is certainly meaningful. I don't. That's not. It's going to have serious consequences for policy.
Right.
And maybe that's where the question was going. That
it is.
A 3 to 4 point shift towards from one party to another sometimes is going to have a very disproportionate effect on the policies and the outcomes of government.
So before we get into the outcomes of government, because I want to get there, and I want to let Chris, because this could be a 4-hour show, so I'm going to try to minimize. Let me ask one more question about historically, a 3% shift. Is it unusual from, like, if we were to go to 20, 16, 12, 8, is a 3% shift in a party, is that big, or is it like normally it's 2%, this is a 3%? I don't have any idea.
It's well within the range.
Normal, and then the other thing that I guess I want to ask about is, I know that normally in midterm elections, the party in power, there's a shift back. So seems like there's this back and forth. So this 3% shift would tend to midterms push back by 1 or 2%?
Usually it's hard to put a percentage on it because it varies from election to election. But there is a well-known, effect called the surge and decline that happens. That in a presidential election year, the turnout is juiced. Something probably 60% of the country probably voted on Tuesday. So you end up with a lot of voters showing up, and when a lot of people show up, including voters that aren't the most engaged and attached to the political system, they tend to overwhelmingly support the winner of the race. And that's how the winner wins, with more voters.
Sure.
But 2 years later, there's a decline in turnout, and all those voters that surged to support the candidate that eventually won often will stay home, and you end up with a reversion back towards the mean. It doesn't happen in every election, but the vast majority of elections, presidents will lose seats in Congress in the midterms.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have some questions that have come through to ask. Two of them are really related to the conversation that you two were just having. They're different topics, but I think I'll throw them out at the same time because they're familiar ones to you, I know. If we have this issue around polar opposites in candidates and significant number of people in the middle, is that a reason to have third parties? And then and a different but kind of related question is, why do we have the Electoral College?
Okay. Two big questions. Okay, let's go. So third parties. We have third parties. They exist. There are plenty of them. If you want to go vote for them, you're more than welcome to.
I want to be respectful to the questioner. Why can we not have a winning
exactly.
third party?
Oh, no, that was going to be my next step.
But just to be fair, that was the question.
So the reason why, the short answer, is that if you look at the countries that have robust multi-party systems where you have 3, 4, 10 parties in the legislature, all of them have different election rules than us. In countries like our own, where we have single-member districts that are decided by a plurality of the vote, meaning there's one winner per district, and whoever gets the most votes wins. You end up with a situation where if there is a small party, especially an ideological party, that is unlikely to win, there's an incentive for that small party supporters to vote strategically, meaning they're not going to necessarily vote for their first choice, but instead shift their vote towards a candidate that they think has a greater chance of actually winning.
Right.
And whether someone does that or not is up to them, but it does have a major effect. In other countries that have these multi-party systems, they elect their representation completely differently. They have proportional representation, where a lot of times you don't even vote for the candidates themselves, you vote for the party. And the seats in the legislature are divided up by the proportion of votes that the party gets. So if a party gets 30% of the vote, they get about 30% of the seats in the parliament. In the United States, if you get 30% of the vote, you're not going to get anything.
Right. That's why I linked to those two questions, because then that goes back to the 51, 49, 50-50 split in the popular vote leads to one party having all the power.
Yep. Exactly.
So why does that happen?
So, the other thing I want to say just really quickly on third parties is that we've had third parties become major parties. The Republican Party was a third party at one point. It hasn't been one since before the Civil War, but in theory, you could imagine, one of the parties splintering over some issue and another party organizing and becoming a major party. It's unlikely, but it could happen.
So could you talk about that in terms of I think what you're saying is you do not see that is likely to happen, because I've read some things about the kind of Lincoln Party side of the Republican Party and the MAGA side of the Republican Party, that they're two. Now they seem to, in some sense, vote together, or many of them. Because of what you said, they made a choice and they said, of these two, I'm going to stick with my party. But is there are there political scientists who believe that there might be enough of a split here that there could become a strong alternative Republican Party?
Yeah, I think the more likely scenario is that the parties evolve.
Okay.
You talk about how the Republican Party today is very different than the Republican Party of
15 years ago.
Yeah, 15 years ago, 100 years ago, Teddy Roosevelt was a Republican, would probably be a Democrat now.
Yeah.
So the parties themselves evolve. If you want to talk about parties changing, look at the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party was the party of the Confederacy, the party of anti-civil rights in the Reconstruction. They were the party of segregation in the South in the 1950s. And the parties themselves slowly evolve. And the Democratic Party did fracture over civil rights in the 1960s. And for a while, there was a very popular third party in the South that gained electoral votes.
So what would you, could I just ask you, if you were to, I love that analysis, because I think, and I know our students get that, but I love that our small audience can hear you, because I know you do this in class. But that is something that I'm not sure, I mean, we're supposed to learn that in high school, social studies, but I'm not sure how many people, if they were asked that question, which of the two parties, especially if you're a 20-year-old, which of the two parties supported slavery and segregation before the Civil War?
Yeah.
I think most people would say Republican, I think. But that's not historically true. But so what I guess I want to ask is, the shift that you're seeing in this election, what ways is it moving the party that, I'll say 100 years from now, could you see something that's happening to these two parties that could 100 years from now, if it kept in its same direction for both? I'd love you to talk about both.
For sure.
This is where the Democratic Party, if it stays on its course, is going 100 years from now. And there was actually a question somewhat to this effect, but I'll let you talk and then maybe we'll use that as a follow-up.
So just to kind of look at a couple broad trends that have happened in the past 10 years, we can look at education as one change within the parties. It used to be, when I was younger, that the more educated a person was, people with bachelor's degrees, advanced degrees, they were more likely to be a Republican. That is completely flipped now. We can look at it on racial lines. Again, I want to be really careful about making broad descriptions about demographic voting in this election yet, because we don't have the final weighted exit polls. But it appears that Trump did very well with Latino voters. That's a major shift. And so you can see in the demographics of the party how they can evolve over time, but also in ideology. The Democratic coalition, spanned the length of Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on the left, and also included Dick Cheney and Adam Kinzinger on the right, and Liz Cheney on the right. And so,
in this election, the people who said,
election,
I think you should vote for the Democratic candidate for president, those people.
Yeah, some of the most liberal people in Congress
went on the TV and said.
And some of the most Republican people I can think of in prior years. So how the Democratic Party responds to this election loss or future elections, might suggest that they could move in a more liberal direction, or they could moderate and move in a more
So
centrist
one
direction.
of the questions that
really
came
will
in that's a
depend.
follow-up to this, Steve, was, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong because I'm not looking at but the Democratic Party seems to now be the party of the educated, which you already said, and of women.
Yes.
And is it enough? So
based on the results, no.
Well, but again, it's 50, and I guess I would say trending. Is it enough moving forward to be the party of college educated in general and women? Women's issues and issues.
Is that accurate?
Is that an accurate description? I mean, this is the questioner said that. It seems like the Democratic Party is focused on those two populations.
Certainly trending in that direction. Again, these are generalizations. There are plenty of people without bachelor's degrees that are Democrats, and there are plenty of people with PhDs that are Republicans.
And there's plenty of women who voted for Donald Trump.
Yeah, a lot of women have voted for Donald Trump, and a lot of men voted for Kamala Harris. So we're talking about minor shifts. But I shouldn't say minor even. Like the gender gap is probably going to be pretty large in this election.
Yeah. And let me ask you that. When will you know that? You're saying right now, I don't know enough today. So if you ask me questions about specific gender gap, I can't answer it. So is it a month? Is it 2 months?
Yeah, it'll probably be about a month.
Before
so you can find analyses online that look at changes in Latino vote and things like that. But a lot of times they're based on exit polls. So this is kind of a civics lesson. So an exit poll is a poll that is done asking people how they voted right after the election. So sometimes it's physically in person. They'll be outside of the polling place, and they'll ask tens of thousands of people how do they vote and get their demographics. To capture early vote and online vote, they also call up people. So we have those poll results now. Those get released on election day. So you can see, so many people who said they were Latino also voted for Trump. Yeah. But we also know that there's tremendous bias in who responds to surveys. That some people are much more likely to answer a phone call survey. Some people are much more likely to answer somebody going up to them in a parking lot. And because of those potential biases, the results of those surveys have to be weighted to the overall results of the election in that precinct or that county or that state, depending on how they do it. And as a result, let's say you end up with too many women answering your survey in the exit poll. Well, if 70% of the people who answered your survey are women, you have too many women in your sample. That's going to overestimate the gender gap effect, possibly. So once the weighting is applied, you count the opinions of those people you oversampled less, and you count the opinions of the people you undersampled more, and you get a more accurate depiction of the electorate. But for that to happen, we need all the votes to be counted, and there are still millions and millions of votes coming in from California and other states that do mail voting.
So I'm going to change the subject a little bit, and then we're going to transition to some looking forward, to what we can expect in the next few months. But there's a kind of theoretical question that came in that thinking about the future as well. If the House and the Senate and the presidency are all in one party, knowing what we know about polarization that we talked about earlier, what's the likelihood of any kind of bipartisan
very low, I would say. One of the consequences of polarization is that because the parties have sorted ideologically, there's very little overlap between them. So you are unlikely to get a lot.
Actual
in terms of their beliefs and values.
Yeah.
So it becomes very difficult to find a conservative Democrat that's going to work with the Republican majority in the House. And it's going to be very difficult to find common ground between the parties. And that's why we see sometimes large policy shifts from election to election, based on
Okay.
who wins.
Yeah.
And I realized I didn't answer the Electoral College question that
I
the
know,
person
it's
had.
okay.
But I can go back to answer that real quick.
Yeah.
The Electoral College is a kind of a relic of the 1890s or 1880s, not 1780s. But it's in the Constitution, so it's unlikely to change.
Yeah, it would take bipartisanship.
Yeah,
to
it would
change
take bipartisanship and a constitutional amendment to change it. And in our current situation, the past two presidents that benefited from an electoral college and popular vote split have been Republicans. So now it's a partisan issue as well as a question of fairness and democracy. So once you inject partisanship into it, there's no way you're going to get 2/3 of Congress to get rid of the Electoral College and 3/4 of the states. And even if you did, the Electoral College gives a big advantage to smaller states because every state is guaranteed at least one representative and 2 senators, so every state gets 3 electoral votes, whether they deserve that by population or not. So a state like Wyoming, I'm not a math genius, I just looked up these stats for class the other day. In Wyoming, based on the last census, there's 1 elector to the Electoral College for every 195,000 people.
Okay.
In California, there's 1 elector for every 750,000 people. So
The power is almost 4 to 1.
yeah, it's substantial. And so as a result, even if it wasn't a partisan issue, even if there was a constitutional amendment that was going to be ratified by the states, I don't see smaller states agreeing to it.
Yeah, Wyoming citizens would never say,
why would
oh, this is a
Wyoming
great
say
idea.
that? Or Delaware, or North Dakota, or South Dakota. Why would they want to give up that
relative power.
Yeah.
So could you tell us a little bit about what's going to happen next in terms of, just to remind people, how the election is over, the change of power happens in January, like what are some of the steps that happen between now and then?
So first off, we have to finish counting. Some states that primarily conduct their elections by mail, like California, the state law is that you can mail your ballot and it has to be postmarked by election day. So it's going to take a few days for those, a week and a half for those to keep trickling in and get counted. So once that's done and once states have all their votes counted, they certify the election results. And that will give the state legislatures the permission then to send the slate of electors from that state, to the Electoral College. I don't believe it's like an in-person meeting anymore. I think they vote remotely, but that takes place in mid-December. I think it's December 15th. Actually, I have it in my notes. Sorry, this is the arcane part of the. December 17th. Okay. I don't have the Constitution memorized, but on December 17th, they'll submit their votes and officially vote to make Donald Trump and J.D. Vance president and vice president. And then the new Congress that's going to come in starting in January will open up those votes and certify the election.
Okay.
So Joe Biden's still president until January 20th, Inauguration Day. The current Congress will return and do a lame duck session. I don't expect any major laws to be passed at that point, especially considering Republicans control the House. They'll be able to block anything that the Democrats try to slip in. Because the Democrats control the Senate at the moment and still have the presidency, you could imagine some judicial nominations going through. You could imagine appointments going through, something that would only have to go through the Senate, but I don't expect very many changes.
So can we I know we're running out of time, but I do want to do a few things. So one, I want to just acknowledge, and I think all three of us, this is where I kind of talked about the polarization. One, elections matter. So I think we should just acknowledge that you are saying that though it was only a 3% kind of shift
and even that's an estimate
for the country.
It
might be
2%.
2 or 4%. So, but it has consequences. We're not going to be able to get through all this, and I'm going to try to do it in like rapid fire. Maybe in general you could talk about if, and this is a big if, because the thing we still don't know is about the House, right?
Yes.
But there I think is a
90%
leaning, very high probability that the House will also be Republican. So I'm going to start with the one that I think is the most consequential that was talked about. I'd like asked about a few things that were talked about on the trail and the difference between saying something on the campaign trail and actually getting it done. Removing the filibuster. So I think the filibuster still slows down the ability for even all three parties in control being able to just do anything they want. And could you talk a little bit about that?
So the filibuster is a rule that is in the Senate. It's a Senate rule. It's not a law. So at any point, the senators can vote to change it. But it's a rule that says that you need 3/5 of majority to stop debate in the Senate. So what that means is that a committed minority of 39 senators, in theory, 41 senators, in theory, grind the Senate to a halt and block legislation. It's a negative power.
Right, and the Democrats will have 41 senators.
Yes. Yep. So they would
have 41
They would
senators.
be able to filibuster any legislation.
But there's been talk on both sides of the aisle about getting rid of this because
it has been gotten rid of in many instances.
Yeah. So
you used to be able to filibuster judicial nominees. That was removed. So that's how many judicial nominees get passed now.
So
the Republicans could do that. I could see if the Democrats in the Senate are stopping a key piece of the Republican agenda, I think they would do it personally. The Democrats, most of the Democrats, I think, would do it if they were in the same position.
And tell me about Chris was just asking about the process. So could you give us a sense of, because I think there are some things that were said on the campaign trail that are deeply impactful to people in the Lewis community. Some things that were promised by Donald Trump and J.D. Vance on the campaign trail that have real consequences to people's lives. How long would you say in general it takes, let's say you take a position of mass deportation of 1 million undocumented residents, they're not citizens, residents of the United States. How long would it take an administration to pull that off? I'll give you a second one, and then you can talk about both these. We're going to eliminate the Department of Education, also said on the campaign trail. Both of these have significant consequences for our community and our institution. So is that that could happen, but it's not going to happen for 16 or 18 months, because actually doing that, and I think these might be two different timelines. What's the general timeline? I mean, changing a law, it's not going to happen on January 22nd, right?
Well, the thing about the deportations is that it already is the law that, if you are in the country, illegally, it is, you can be deported at any point. So it's more a question of process of how that would go about happening. The President of the United States can certainly order immigrations and customs officials to conduct raids and to ramp up deportation activity, but they are limited in terms of their staff and their resources, and they have been doing that under Democratic and Republican presidents alike. So it's not necessarily a case of want, but can.
So statutory limitations versus budgetary limitations.
Budgetary limitations. There's only so many agents. Donald Trump has promised to include local law enforcement in those operations. And that's where you end up with interesting dynamics of the President of the United States doesn't really have any authority over local police.
Right.
But if local politicians are cooperative with federal officials, then maybe it happens unequally across the country based on which politicians are willing to authorize those local resources for this federal goal. He's also, suggested using the National Guard and the U.S. military to assist as well. I don't want to give false, hope necessarily that it's not going to happen. It could, but it also would be very politically contentious as a possibility, and also have serious downstream effects on the overall national economy that Donald Trump might not actually want to happen. Because if you eliminate 20 million workers in the United States, you're going to cause a massive labor shortage. That's going to spike inflation. They'll make, it'll be like instant double-digit inflation, in my opinion. So how he goes about doing that while trying to keep his campaign promise of the mass deportations while at the same time trying to maintain his status as a president of a party that hopes to continue to have power in the future is going to be tricky. The Department of Ed. Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. I
Yeah.
think we are out of time.
Yeah,
okay.
We really need to stop. So it's so interesting. We could go on
We
for.
really could talk for 4 hours.
Maybe we'll
I
have you
think.
back in January.
Well,
for
it might be
part two.
interesting. It might be interesting to have you and maybe somebody from another one of our faculty who also could talk about consequences in either social service agencies or education. For I was thinking about the Department of Education.
Yeah.
But some of this, I guess, what I'm saying is, this is not going to happen on January 21st. Many of these things, but 6 months from then, it might be interesting to talk about the
I think
consequences.
you're more likely to see more symbolic action taken right away.
Yeah.
Like there might be some deportations right away, just to make a show of it. But in terms of the large scale, the promises of 20 million people, like that would take years to do.
Yeah. Well, again, like Chris said, thank you so much for being with us. Your knowledge and expertise and years of research really shows, and it's really valuable, I think, to our community. And the elections were consequential, and we'll keep seeing those as we do every 4 years and every 2 years in our community. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Sint, for joining me in hosting this. We wish you a wonderful week. We wish swiftness and accuracy for all our athletes. We're grateful for all those who are creating so many great events over the next week on campus for our community. We wish you well. Many blessings to you and all those that you love.